NHL insider Frank Seravalli just released his top 20 trade targets, and already with the David Jiricek trade, the NHL trade market is heating up. What other NHLers could get dealt? What are the latest scoops and info on them? Where could they go? Well, make sure you watch till the end as we go through all the latest trade rumors in the NHL today. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey trade rumor content just like this as we lead up to the deadline next year, presented by BetUS. Now, before we get into the Seravalli trade targets, let's talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, the best place to make picks throughout this hockey season. And all you guys got to do is use code YouTube150 on your first deposit, and you'll get a 150% sign-up bonus, and then you'll get a 125% sign-up bonus on your next deposits after that. Simple and easy. And if you want to make picks for this hockey season, BetUS is the place to do so, with so many options on different NHL games, also different teams to make the playoffs, the different potential teams to record 100 plus points. I mean, there's so many different options there. Also, you got Stanley Cup winners, you got the IHF World Championship winner, even PWHL odds. BetUS, for really every single one of your hockey needs, is the place to be. Let's get straight into it from Frank Seravalli and his latest article on the trade targets. He says, with the headline, the Blue Jackets are weighing offers on top trade target David Jiricek. Now, to give some context here, this article was basically released right before the David Jiricek deal. So even though he is gone, he's the only player on this list that's been dealt so far. Now, I love at the bottom here, he says, TikTok. There's never been a November quite like this one in recent NHL history. With the pressure seemingly getting to some teams barely a month and a half into the season, we've seen coaching changes, minor trades, and memos indicating teams are open for business. And some of those things have occurred with some of the better rosters in the league. And of course, now we've seen the David Jiricek deal. So now we've seen coaching changes and major NHL trades. We've been talking in the last couple weeks how much the trade market is really starting to go. There's been a lot of disappointing teams in the middle of the NHL that didn't expect to be there, and we've seen a lot of changes already. And trust me, with how much we've been hearing lately, the Jiricek deal, some of the coaching changes, that is the least of what we're going to see. There could be some major changes still coming up here. Now, because this article was released before the Jiricek deal, he starts off this segment saying how the Blue Jackets are pretty far down the track on the Jiricek deal, but he also mentions a few other teams here. We've also got the New York Rangers ready to make moves, and the Sens, Preds, Penguins, and maybe even the Boston Bruins looking to shake things up. Now, starting things out in the trade targets, number one is David Jiricek. No surprise there. We saw him dealt to the Minnesota Wild in a pretty landmark deal. I actually just released a member exclusive video talking about my thoughts on that Jiricek deal if you guys are interested in that. But of course, number one, no surprise, but the rest of the top 20 gets really interesting. Starting us out at number two is Marcus Pettersson of the Pittsburgh Penguins. As Frank does mention, the Penguins are open for business. Pettersson is one of the few players on the roster with real trade value. He's in the final year of his deal at a reasonable cap number, and he plays a solid enough game to be a reliable top 4D. I fully expect Marcus Pettersson to be one of the premier pieces of this NHL trade deadline. If the Penguins are smart, I think Pettersson is somebody that they should deal, ultimately because of how much value they can recoup. I mean, Frank Seravalli is talking about how good his contract is, but I think that's honestly underselling it. Just at above $4 million for somebody that with the pedigree of Pettersson, with the defensive ability we know he has, is astounding. And also considering that he just has this year left in his deal, he's going to be an extremely easy rental for a lot of contenders to bring on. Obviously, no player this year for Pittsburgh has been at the level that they'd want, but this season, I still think he's been pretty solid, but especially last year, I thought he was unbelievable in a lot of key areas and was really propelling that Pittsburgh defense when players like Erik Karlsson weren't pulling their weight. But in Pettersson's case, even though he's somebody I think for Pittsburgh, if they want to contend, they should be keeping, I don't think they're going to be contending anytime soon, so personally, I would deal it. Regarding the asking price, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more than people are expecting. I could absolutely see more than just a first-round pick being involved, potentially a solid prospect as well going back to Pittsburgh. I think we're going to see a couple of pretty solid pieces going back, mostly just because of how easy he is to deal in the first place. Now, what negates that a little bit is his trade protection. He has an 8-team no-trade list, but at the same time, I don't think 8 teams is going to be much of a problem. With that cap hit, with the player he is, they're going to find a way to move him if they want to. Next up at number 3, Frank mentions Morgan Frost, who was a player that I had in a potential David Jiricek deal. Ultimately, of course, that didn't end up happening, but I think Morgan Frost is one of the more interesting players on the block. As Frank says, in need of an obvious change of scenery, Frost has a few things going for him on the trade market. He's a center, and the position is particularly highly in demand this season, and he has shown that he still has the potential to be a higher-end point producer. 2 seasons ago, 46 points as a 23-year-old. Last year, he was a frequent target of healthy scratches, and he still collected collected 41 points. Torts said recently he can't coach him that way anymore, as it wouldn't be fair to Frost. So what is fair? I mean, I think the best thing for Frost is to go to just a different environment, a place where he can actually strut some of those offensive skills. He is just an obvious not a fit with Torts' system. I mean, it's just a situation that I don't think is ever going to work itself out, and I think that's been made pretty obvious. One team that I still think is a pretty natural fit is the Nashville Predators. I mean, Svechnikov has been solid in that third line center role, and I think he will be good in the future for that, but I could easily see Frost fitting into that third line spot, bringing some offense that Nashville needs. But with how they've handled some of the younger players so far this year, I'm not sure if Frost is going to be in that much of a better position, but I hope to be wrong on that. Interestingly, though, we have another flyer here in Rasmus Ristolainen. As Frank says, the defense market is thinning with each and every extension. Ristolainen's name is circulated through the rumor mill, and the Flyers are hoping he will generate enough buzz between now and March to net a solid return. Teams are still drawn to the size, though his ability to defend is still a question mark, and his point production has slid. Staying healthy and on the ice will help everyone's cause. You know, I haven't paid too much attention to Ristolainen this season. I thought last year defensively, he actually wasn't horrible. I don't think he was the worst in the world. This year, it's a different story, I would say, at least from what I've seen. But at the same time, Ristolainen is always going to have that hype because he's Rasmus Ristolainen, and there's nothing we can really do about that. Most likely, though, I see that cap hit and the term being an issue. 2 years remaining at $5.1 million. Even though I think a lot of teams would want a Ristolainen, at that contract, I think it's a little bit less likely. Now, at number 5 is Ivan Provorov of the Columbus Blue Jackets. We've heard his name a little bit over the last month. Frank says interest will be ramping up on Provorov, who was on our trade targets board over the summer, but is now in the final year of his deal, now becoming a free agent. He's a great skater and have confidence can be an impact piece. It's important to keep in mind Provorov has already had his salary retained once by LA, so his current $4.7 million cap hit is only able to be cut half in once more as GM Don Waddell considers his options. Now, on paper, I just don't think Provorov has really been the needle mover that he's been really claimed to be in the past. He's something that for Columbus has been fine. I mean, 32 points last season, 8 points in 23 games this year. He's been okay in a puck moving role. Again, when he has that confidence, there are some good flashes here and there. But how much is he a needle mover for many other teams? Is he actually going to be an impact top 4D? I'm not really quite sure he's that type of guy at this stage. But I think considering that lower cap hit at 4.7, there's always the possibility that a contender sees what they could potentially get out of him. But I think especially considering he is a free agent after this year, that makes things really interesting for Columbus, who could kind of hitch their wagon in a different direction. At number 6, no surprise to see Jacob Trouba here. I mean, everybody knows that Jacob Trouba is on the block. Everybody knows that he is out there. We've talked about him quite a bit on this channel over the last couple of weeks. Would not be surprised to see a deal happen here soon, especially with just how much the Rangers have slid over the last couple of weeks. Now, at number 7, we have Yanni Gourde, another player that we talked about before, but somebody that I think is really going to be interesting in the trade market here. The Kraken have gotten calls on Gourde, but don't appear to be in any rush to move him, though it's certainly trending in that direction before March 7th. So Gourde is somebody that is on the block, but I think we'd have to have a pretty good offer to actually get. We talked about Gourde before. He's somebody that has always had such a good, consistent playoff success, and I think for teams out there that are looking to add somebody to their third line center spot, he is the ideal guy. I mean, I remember the Rangers going after Alex Wennberg a couple of years back, but Gourde is the perfect player for that role for every single contender out there. And even though the Kraken might not want to move him now, I think the offers are going to be too good to refuse once trade deadline day comes. Now, coming in at number 8 and another flyer, we have Joel Farabee, somebody that this season has struggled pretty mightily. In 22 games, has 3 goals, 5 assists, 8 points, and with 3 years remaining at $5 million, he's somebody that is going to be a really interesting move. As Frank says, this isn't Farabee's first appearance on the trade targets board. He's still in need of a change of scenery. Last year, Farabee had produced 20 even strength goals and 50 total points, despite his seemingly perpetual position in Tor's doghouse. Imagine what he could do in a fresh start. The Flyers are open to anything and everything, and his contract shouldn't be viewed as a detriment, but a positive, because the prime of his career is already locked up at a reasonable number. And that is true. If he is able to get back to that type of production at that level, $5 million is a pretty reasonable deal. It's kind of sad because Farabee is the exact type of player that I think should be able to work in Tort's system, but it just seems like a mismatch in different ways. But I think is somebody that absolutely could bring some unbelievable value. I mean, he is still just 24 years old and is starting to enter that prime of his career, but you can see just the steady uptick in point production just year after year. And Farabee does have his problems in terms of some of the consistency with his work ethic, what we see every single shift. But I think in terms of actual opportunity and what he could get somewhere else, I just hope he ends up leaving Philadelphia, because he seems like he isn't a core part of that team going forward. Now we go into number 9, and a fascinating name here in Josh Norris of the Ottawa Senators. We had a pretty solid start for him, but he finds himself on the trade board here. As Frank says, after a solid start, a disastrous November has left a feeling of the same old for the Sens. That's led to conversations around the league, and while teams are interested in Pinto and Greg and others in Ottawa's foregroup, the belief is Norris might be the one to first go in a shakeup. The big detractor is his repeated shoulder injury that appears to be in a good place now. He has 5 years and nearly $47 million remaining on his deal in real cash, which doesn't help. But this is still a natural center who scored 35 goals as a 22-year-old, and that is true, especially with Norris and the pedigree there. If he is healthy long term, I don't think it's too much of a problem, that contract, even though I think it is pretty likely still going to be an overpayment no matter what. But the cap is going up quite a bit over the next couple of years, and that could lead to some teams being a little bit more okay with the term there potentially. I think, again, if Norris is healthy, this is somebody that I think can be a great goal scorer for you, but the consistency is still a little bit of an issue as he fully comes back from that injury. My problem for the Sens is, how do you make a Norris deal happen and get better in the first place? Because we've seen the struggles of Pinto and Greg, and I don't think this Pinto, especially with his 3 points this season, is going to be able to fill that second line center role this season, or maybe that's the role he needs. Who knows? But I think it's the Sens in a Norris trade would want to get a second line center in return. Is that an older player, perhaps? Is that kind of like a Vincent Trocheck to the Rangers situation? I don't know what would happen there, but in the case of a Norris deal, it's hard to see the Sens getting that much better from it, especially if Norris is going to continue to get better as he rehabs from that injury. So we'll see what ends up happening there, but the fact that he's in the top 10 here is fascinating. Now, after the top 10, I'm just going to go through the names that I find the most interesting. At number 11 is Brandon Tanev, another Seattle Kraken forward here, and this is an interesting one. He's a pending UFA, $3.5 million AAV, and always a good depth piece, but Frank says the Kraken may be forced to move a forward once defenseman Vince Dunn returns from injury, and Tanev is a candidate given the interest in his game. He's a fierce forechecker with speed and competitive juice that teams crave. He's also been productive. Tanev has 5 goals in 22 games after scoring 7 in 66 games last season. That makes him an ideal trade target once the Kraken begin to make decisions, but nothing is imminent quite yet. Now, since this, we have seen Vince Dunn return from injury and no Brandon Tanev trade, but I could easily see Seattle kind of in the same situation as Gourde, where they might not want to get rid of Tanev immediately, but I think the price could be pretty rich for the Kraken here, given Tanev's pedigree, the consistency there, and just how good of a character he is, man. I mean, I love Brandon Tanev. I would take him so easily on my team every single day of the week as just a leader on the team, and I think for Seattle, that might be a reason they don't want to give him up, but is a reason why his trade value could be pretty high. At number 13, we see Mike Matheson of the Montreal Canadiens being on the block here. 1 year remaining, $4.8 million AAV, and Frank says, given the nature of their blue line and their need to better support young defensemen assimilating into the lineup, aka Lane Hutson, the Canadiens don't really want to move Matheson, but they may not have a choice, given that his value will be arguably its highest before the deadline. Did you know Matheson was 9th among defensemen scoring last year with 62 points? He moves the puck, is comfortable playing the right side, and actually defends better than he's given credit for when proper expectations are set. Is this just a Frank Seravalli puff piece on Matheson? After all of this, is this just what it is? I guess if you think Matheson is the worst defensive player in the league, then maybe he would be better than that, but I really don't see at this stage, at least with what Matheson is, he's turned into more of an offensive defenseman. Maybe if he reverts back to his defensive self, but I feel like Matheson could only be one of those two things at any given time, the offensive D or the defensive D. So maybe there's potential to curve him in any one direction, but I think for the Habs, I would agree in this case. In Matheson's trade value, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a better point than it ever has been. In fact, I think it's already been a mistake in some cases that they haven't dealt Matheson, because I think his value has already declined a decent bit. But at the same time, what he can do on the 5-on-5 ability, with how he can skate, with how he can maneuver around the ice, there's going to be a lot of teams out there that would at least be acquiring about him. You guys know my disdain for not having Lane Hutson on that PP1, but I think a reason for that is trying to boost up the value of Matheson, trying to make sure that he gets some of those power play points so that potentially they could deal him in the end. That's the only reason why I feel like you should even have Matheson on PP1. So maybe that's the Habs plan after all, but I just have a feeling they're going to have him sticking around, and we're going to have to deal with this for a little bit longer. Another name that piqued my interest here at number 19 is Matthew Olivier of the Columbus Blue Jackets. This is somebody that's actually had a really good start to the season. I think he's gotten a couple more points after this article was put out. So better than 9 points in 20 games. He's a pending UFA at $1.1 million, and he's becoming a little bit of an interesting piece here because, as Frank says, Olivier checks all the boxes as a classic deadline pickup. Pending free agent, brings energy, hits everything that moves, scores the odd goal. Surprisingly, Olivier has already racked up 6 goals barely a quarter of the way into the the season, shooting 25% from the floor. He's also good for about 3 hits a game and has 3 hits in the month of November, or 3 fights in the month of November. And absolutely true. I think in Olivier's case, that shooting percentage is going to go down quite a bit, but he's certainly been a positive in a lot of ways for Columbus. Honestly, one of the biggest surprises of the year for Columbus, for a team that has already been pretty surprising. I get the sense, though, that Olivier is just a big part of that Columbus locker room and a big part of what that team wants to have more of going forward. I mean, in a lot of ways, I think Columbus is trying to get tougher, trying to get stronger, and I think in a lot of ways, Olivier is what Columbus isn't right now, but wants to get more of. And I think it's a situation where, even though Olivier would check a lot of the boxes for a rental, I could absolutely see Columbus having him as a player that they stick around and maybe even reject like a second-round pick for, because I think what he brings for an identity purpose is what Columbus would really want. Now, I don't know much about the Columbus locker room, obviously. I'm not in there a lot. If Olivier isn't a big part of it, then I would say trade him, because that shooting percentage is not going to be lasting, and I think you can find similar players out there in the open market. But if he is a big part of that locker room, I think that is something that Columbus needs to prioritize going forward. It's something that has been an issue. It's been something that's been an inconsistent thing there, and I think they really need to prioritize strength in the locker room, and especially for a lot of those younger players, having those big influences that can really show them what it's like to be in the NHL, how you need to get stronger, how you can really benefit from a physical presence. I think that's something that Columbus could really use going forward. So in some ways, I could see why Columbus would trade them, but I would absolutely see Columbus keeping him and honestly benefiting from it. And then for the last player here on the list, we got Chris Kreider. No surprise to see him there. As Frank Seravalli mentions, Kreider is a bit of a different spot than Trouba as a trade candidate. He's a career Ranger, 3rd in all-time franchise list in goals, 10th in points, and 10th in games played. He's also one of the best net front presence players in the world and plays an integral role on the Rangers' power play. He may be available, but for a team with a mandate to win, is it possible to make an in-season Kreider trade and still make the team better? That will be tough to do. And that is true. I think for any Kreider deal, it's going to be hard for both teams to get better in the deal, but I think there is a hockey trade that can still be made. The problem is, I just don't know if Kreider is the guy I would deal. The problem is, players like Zibanejad, who had a much sooner deal, have all that trade protection, and it's a lot harder to trade them in the end. In Kreider's case, he's something that's a lot more expendable with his contract, and with it being at a pretty reasonable cap at $6.5 million, that leaves a lot of teams out there with the possibility of trading for him. The problem is, with how much of a lifelong Ranger he is, it's hard to trade somebody like that, but at the same time, with how much they've been slipping over the past couple of weeks, the Rangers feel like they need to make a massive move, or else their season could be left in the dust. So there is going to be a lot to work with over the Rangers over the next couple of weeks. We'll see how it trends, but if it gets even worse, I would expect to see some pretty major deals, major changes, and everything. But if you guys want to check out the whole article and all the names there, I'll link the whole thing in the description down below so you guys can check it out. But I hope you guys did enjoy some of the analysis for the trade targets out there in the NHL. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already. Of course, comment down below your thoughts on all the trade targets here. Who are the most surprising names to you? Would you want your team to trade for any of them? Let me know your thoughts down below there. And of course, share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all my trade target content, all my trade rumor content in one playlist there for you to binge. And of course, a big thank you to BetUS. Use code YouTube150, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.